Hey guys, welcome back to 1776 or Bust. So today is episode 2 of First Time Buyer. Now these videos are really geared for people who are going out and buying their first handgun, and this is my way of basically showing you the guns that I've had, the guns that I own, and the guns that I have enjoyed enough to actually keep. So this unfortunately won't be everybody's dream gun because unfortunately I don't have unlimited access to these firearms. However, what I am going to show you are the guns that work for me, and I'm going to give you examples as to why that happens. Now, my first video I compared 2 guns. Today I'm actually going to be doing 1. And the title of this video, as you've seen, is actually called the Oddball. Now, some people may say, well, what is an oddball gun? An oddball gun isn't a gun that's just weird looking or has a weird grip or any of that other stuff. What an oddball gun would be is a gun that's out there but is not considered a part of the mainstream, I guess you could say, fanfare. So for example, a gun that would not be an oddball would be something like a Glock. You know, Glocks have sold millions of guns over their lifetime. Smith & Wesson, the same thing. And I'm sure there's plenty of other brands that you guys can definitely put out there, Sig Sauer, H&K, whatever. But the oddball gun is one of those guns that is available, may have been available for quite a while, but for whatever reason, it just have not gotten acceptance in the mainstream norm of the firearms community. So with that, the oddball can have its pros and it can have its cons. And today's example of the oddball gun is going to be this one right here. Now this is my Steyr M9, and interestingly enough, as I look at it on the screen, it actually looks brown, but this is bazooka green Cerakote, and I'm sure as I get to the table, you'll see that color a little bit more. But the Steyr, in my opinion, is a very good example to use as the oddball gun. Why? It has been around for a while. It's had several generations of it, actually 4 to be exact, and more importantly, it is a really fantastic firearm. However, it just hasn't really necessarily received mainstream acceptance. Is that changing? It is slowly, but it's still what I would consider an oddball. And there are some certain risks and some certain rewards if you go and choose this handgun. So let's go to the table, let's take a look at the oddball, and I'll explain a couple of things about it. So stay tuned. All right, guys, so back to the table we go. And as you can see, the oddball Steyr M9 is on the table. Now, just to give you a little background history of the Steyr, it comes in 4 really different types of handguns. You have your S9, your C9, your M9, and your L9. Now, each gun has kind of its own little features, but overall, they're all fantastic handguns. The S9 being its subcompact with a really small grip, probably in the same realm of like an XD Mod 2 or a Glock 26. It's a little bit bigger than a 26 and about the same size as the Mod 2. Then you have your C9, which is basically their carry model, which is very similar to what you would call your Glock 19X. It has the long grip like this right here, which is your standard size grip. But then it's also got the shorter slide, excuse me, and the shorter barrel, which would be very, comparable to the S9. Then you have the M9, which you see here, which is basically their main, I guess you could say duty carry kind of handgun. And yes, it is concealable in my opinion. And then of course you have the L9, which is basically this model here with the long slide. And it's a fantastic shooter because I have that one also. Now, when you take a chance on the oddball handgun, there's a couple of things that you're going to have to think about. First off, is this going to be the type of gun that's going to work for you? Now, in all honesty, guys, I never touched the Steyr M9 before I bought it, or the S9 or the L9. When I saw the gun, I really just liked the way the cut looked on the handgun. What I mean by that is if you look at the shape of the handgun, you'll notice it's got a very deep underhook right here in this little undercut right here under the slide in the frame. And when I saw that angle, I said, boy, that would be very interesting because I think if you're able to grab this gun, what's going to happen is your hand is going to get just devoured by the gun. And what I mean by that is it just simply rests so low and so far into the forward portion of the handgun that when you're shooting it, it's going to have very little recoil. And honestly, guys, I never shot it before, but when I picked it up and I held it in my hand, it was absolutely perfection in my opinion. Now, of course, with the oddball type of handgun, it's a risk you got to take. Sometimes you get these types of handguns and you spend good hard-earned money, but when you go to touch the handgun, you're like, oh my God, this was a mistake. So with the oddball, you have to realize that there are risks to this, and it could be losing a lot of money, and it could be just buying a piece of garbage, to be honest with you. Now, the Steyr has 4 generations, as I stated before. The first couple of generations were not that great. There were some problems with those. However, with the Gen 4s, which you see right here, again, I've had no issues with this handgun whatsoever. Some people have said, well, they've seen some issues with them, but me personally, I've never had that. Now, one of the other things with the oddballs you have to realize is that sometimes when you get these traditional guns that we all know, like the Glocks and the Smiths, they come out of the box with kind of a so-so type of trigger. In other words, it's not the best, it's not the worst, it's doable, but you definitely probably at some point may consider upgrading on that trigger. With the oddball, you may actually come across a gun that has such a great trigger out of the box that you'd never even consider replacing anything in it. And I have to say, with the Steyr M9, that's exactly what you have here. Gun is clear, by the way, if you want to see that, because you don't want me to shoot the camera. But nonetheless, what you're seeing here is the trigger. And the trigger on the Steyr M9, very little take-up, guys. It's got a very wide face on the trigger. The trigger safety right here actually recedes all the way into the polymer trigger, and it's very comfortable. So you don't feel that trigger safety really poking at your finger. So it is very comfortable. Now you'll notice very little take-up, and then that's your wall, and then it breaks. Now this trigger is measuring at about 4 pounds and change, very, very slightly above 4 pounds, but the reset isn't the best reset. A lot of people complain it's not a very tactile reset, or it's not a very audible reset. But you know what? If you're shooting your gun and you don't have ear protection, you're not going to hear the reset in the first place. In a self-defense situation, you're probably not going to be saying, wait, where's that reset at? Not to mention, since this is very similar to a double action only, that reset is the actual position of the first trigger pull. So it's a very consistent trigger pull no matter which, if it's the first, third, 8th, or 10th shot. Now, in regards to these oddball type of guns, what you also have to realize is that there are some inherent problems with these guns. Now, some of those problems could be, it may be a brand new iteration of a handgun that was maybe put out, or it could be a clone of a handgun that's already been put out. So you're going to see those problems. And sometimes it's just poor manufacturing. Sometimes you just get kind of a lemon, but nonetheless, that's a risk at buying one of these oddballs. Overall, if you're looking at the risks versus benefits, that's where it gets kind of a little murky, because again, if you're out there buying your first handgun and let's say funds are limited because you don't have the type of resources to just go out and buy, let's say, any type of gun you want, anytime you want, or to buy a gun so it'll sit in your safe forever, this is the biggest risk to these types of handguns, because ultimately you may get one of these handguns and it looks great. You've heard good things about it. However, it just doesn't work for you. And then what do you do after that? So you have to be careful with that with the oddball gun as well. Some of the things that you also have to look for when you're getting one of these oddball guns is the fact that don't expect a lot of aftermarket support. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, the Steyr. There's not a tremendous amount, although it has grown somewhat, there still isn't a tremendous amount of aftermarket support. So if you're one of those people who buys a handgun, but automatically knows you want to upgrade the sights, you want to maybe put in a trigger bar or a trigger shoe or something of that sort, you may want to stay away from the oddball handgun. The reason being is because it's not a norm or a highly accepted handgun in the gun community, you're not going to see a lot of aftermarket support. Let's face it, most businesses don't operate on the idea of making parts for just one single thing. So as a result, they'll make more for Glocks, for Smiths, for Beretta, for all these others, for CZ, because that's coming up now, obviously. But for, like, let's say a Steyr, there's just not a tremendous amount. Now, interestingly enough, Steyr is actually coming out with more types of aftermarket support. Do you really need a trigger upgrade? Probably not. But there are several sights you can get for these. As you can see, these are big dots. There's also, holsters that are being made finally. So you can see I have one here from Vetter. Fits great. Really like it. And I also have one from Black Arch Holsters as well. And what you have to understand is that sometimes when you buy that oddball handgun, you may not have those options. And if you do, you won't have them for a while. So if you planned on carrying an oddball handgun, you may not be able to unless you buy some generic type holster that maybe isn't the best, and if you don't mind the basic sights that come with it from the factory. So these are all things to consider. In my opinion, is it worth the risk? As a first-time gun buyer, I don't think so. And the reason why I say that is because you don't want to waste your hard-earned money on a single handgun that may work, but unfortunately may not 100% work, because then you're going to be out that money. Then you're going to have to wait again, save up the money, and go and buy yourself another handgun. What I would recommend is probably staying something with a little bit more of a track record. Maybe the Glocks, maybe the M&Ps, the Berettas, the H&Ks, and the SIGs out there in the world. But again, it's going to be your decision, and it's going to be based on what you think. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully this gave you some ideas about oddball handguns. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about what you consider the oddball handguns of the universe right now. And, if you have any tips or advice for the new first-time buyer, please leave the comments down below. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Thumbs up always help, except for the 4 that always give me the thumbs down. Thanks anyway, because they still count. And I hope you guys have a great night. Stay safe. And as always, freedom is never free.